been joined now by Jack Neuman and Bob Wilcox. You're both just slightly older than Mary would have been in 1962, but not a lot, right? Jack, let the students have an idea. Where were you in 62? You know, what age were you and what were you doing?
In 1962, I was 31 years old, and I was in St. Louis, and I was finishing the first complete year of a business that I had started in St. Louis in 1961.
And hand the microphone over to Bob. Bob Wilcox is joining us. Where were you, Bob? Because you weren't in St. Louis, right?
No, I wasn't. I was in New York City, in Manhattan. So if anything was going to happen, we'd probably be in the crosshairs right there. I was in grad school at that time in Manhattan, living on the Upper West Side in Morningside Heights near Columbia University.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
We've got some newsreel footage that shows a little bit of the Manhattan skyline at this period of time, but also gives the students an idea about some other civil defense films that were intended for a more adult audience than just the student audience, and this is the Survival Under Nuclear Attack civil defense film.
Our cities are prime targets for atomic attack, but mass evacuation would be dangerous. An enemy would like nothing better than to have us leave our cities empty and unproductive. If an emergency should come, our factories will be battle stations. Production must go on if we are to win. Our offices and homes will also be posts of duty, not to be deserted. With the knowledge of the first atomic explosions to guide us, our chances for survival will be far better than those of the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if we act on our knowledge and are prepared. If you are at home when a surprise attack occurs, crawl beneath a table if it is very near, or drop to the floor with your back to the window. The immediate danger is over in about a minute, unless the explosion occurred near the ground or water. In this case, radioactive materials are trapped in the particles of dirt or water thrown up by the explosion.
And of course, most nuclear explosions would at some point affect the ground and the water. Jack, as you think back to 1962, as you see that footage, as you think about, you were 31, you were an adult at the time, what's your response to that?
Well, I have a rather cynical view of what the government does. I spent 6 years in military service and as a grunt, and it's kind of my observation that at the lower level, you get what they want to feed you, and they give you the information. They have a responsibility to see that the nation is maintained in good order, and they couldn't have everyone rushing onto Highway 66 trying to get to Kansas. So they tried to give people an alternative for survival that would make people comfortable enough to stay where they were. At least that's my opinion. However, I've noticed in the past 30 days there's been a lot of public relations releases about information that has been released of classified documents and classified information that pertain to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which would, if these young people would look into it, it would flesh out the information that they're getting from this program, and they'd probably get a much fuller understanding of what really occurred, at least a lot more greater understanding than I do.
I think that's an important thing to know. There's all sorts of information coming out at the 50th anniversary now, and some very specific things that we didn't know particularly at the time, that there were tactical nuclear weapons, for example, that the Soviets had given to Castro and that we didn't necessarily know about, and that indeed Castro fought with the Soviets to keep, and the Soviets in essence lied to him a little bit to get those weapons out. Obviously, we learned after the fact that we had Jupiter missiles in Turkey, and part of the agreement was to get the Jupiter missiles out of Turkey as well. One of the interesting things about history is that you think, well, it happened 50 years ago, it must be over. No, as more information comes to light, history is always a story that you continue to learn more about. Bob, when you were in New York City, did you and your grad school friends talk about this? Were you physically and worried? Did you have conversation?
Well, I think we were. Now, you know, being a poor grad student, I didn't have a TV. So unless I happened to be at somebody's apartment who did have one, I didn't see some of the things that we're seeing now. That's sort of what I looked like then. But we picked up the New York Times every morning. We listened to the radio, the reports there. But part of it was, yes, we knew this was very serious, but we'd been living under this threat since the early 50s, and there had always been the possibility of some kind of a nuclear strike once the Soviet Union had first the A-bomb and then the H-bomb. So it wasn't entirely something new, and we'd been living with these, how you can be safe by throwing a piece of paper over your head and all that kind of silliness. But also that buildings, you'd see a sign that said bomb shelter, where you could go. And it was sort of, for those of us who could remember World War II, remembered places in Europe or in Asia where there were air raids. We were seeing reports of things like that. Now here it was right in our own hometown. And I suspect the school I was attending must have probably had somewhere in the basement or somewhere where they had things stacked, and it was some kind of a bomb shelter. I don't remember that the apartment building I was in had one. May have had, but I wasn't aware of it if there was. So I don't know what we would have done, in our little one-bedroom apartment there.
You would have ducked and covered
yes.
under the kitchen table, Bob.
Right.
And then use that tablecloth to protect you.
And our next-door neighbor happened to be a woman who gave piano lessons. We were very near Juilliard, where it was at that time. And I'd hear these pianos, so I guess we could have gone out with music in our ears and anything happened. But
let's see what questions students have. Lions Creek, Florida. A question for Jack and Bob.
What was it like feeling that tomorrow would be you could be dead, and that the day you're living could be your last day?
Any sense of that, Bob, that tomorrow might be, what was it like living with the idea that tomorrow might be, I'm dead, tomorrow might be the end?
Certainly there was that, and as I say, but it was something, it wasn't entirely new. It was heightened in this situation. As we've been saying, we didn't know then quite how close we came to the precipice. More things are coming out all the time. We knew not that long afterwards, where once it was settled, we had some idea. Now all these other things are coming out. But I'm not sure that as I remember it anyway, I think it really started for me more in the 50s, because especially when Russia put Sputnik up and the ICBM became a possibility. You were always under the threat. They were talking about 15 minutes and it could be here, 15 minutes warning, whatever that really meant. But so this was just, in a way, more of the same. And there were so many other things. This was the period of the big civil rights activity.
So many things were happening.
That fall had been the riots at the University of Mississippi when they tried to integrate. And I do remember being in a friend's apartment and watching that on TV.
And that's
kind
real.
of upsetting. This kind of thing
seemed just as real, if not more real. Cause it was,
in a way, yeah.
Jack, you had kids at the time?
Yes.
And do you remember worry and concern for them? Did they have a sense of what was going on?
No, I don't really believe they did. They may have had drills in school, but it was never my policy to interfere with what went on in school. My responsibility was to take care of my children, and I must tell you that at the time I owned a building in University City that had a coal bunker in it. And the coal bunkers in those days were built out of poured concrete. The rest of the foundation was limestone, but because of the fire code, they built the coal bunkers out of poured concrete, but they had really inadequate doors. And for some time I contemplated utilizing that if there was any problem. But I really never really thought there was going to be a problem. My personal feeling was that it was all political, and it was a ploy by Khrushchev and the Russian government. And Khrushchev didn't run the Russian government. It's run by the Central Committee. But I always thought it was a ploy by them to retaliate for the number of missiles that we had surrounded Russia with. That was my personal feeling. That's right, because
we had the missiles in Turkey as well.
And a lot of people don't realize the Russians lost 40 million people during the war. They're not about to go to war again.
On that note, Jack, you're going to get the final word because I'm being told we've got about 20 seconds left. So Jack, Bob, Walt, Harriet, Dave, Mary, thanks very much for joining us.